Hey, good evening, everyone. Glad you could join us for our Wednesday night study as Mark continues to teach us through the book of Psalms. There's different chapters that have been on his heart. So I hope that you could just pray with me right now. Just ask the Lord to breathe into us, to speak to us, and even as we worship, that we'll just give him all the glory and honor that he deserves. So let's pray together. Lord, we do just thank you for who you are, Father, or the stories that we have from your word, God, or the stories of David and his triumphs, Lord, but also his trials, God, and Lord, how they speak to us, Lord, and we can reflect on them, God, and Lord, you know the trials that we go through, Lord, the temptations and the hardship, God, but through it all, Lord, you are good, and you are, Lord, you stand forever, Lord, your great name, Jesus. And so we just lift you up tonight. The lost are saved and find their way, and at the sound of your great name, and all condemned feel no shame at the sound of your great name. In every fear it has no place, and at the sound of your great name, the enemy, he has to leave, and at the sound of your great name, and Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us, the Son of God and man. You are high and lifted up, and all the world will praise your great name. In your great name. And all the weak find their strength, and at the sound of your great name, and hungry souls receive grace, and at the sound of your great name, the fatherless, they find their rest at the sound of your great name, and the sick are healed, and the dead are raised at the sound of your great name. In Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us, the Son of God and man. You are high and lifted up, and all the world will praise your great name. In your great name, Jesus, in your great name. Oh. Redeemer, my healer, Lord Almighty, Redemptor, my Savior, you are my King. Redeemer, my healer, Lord Almighty, Defender, my Savior, you are my King. Yes, you are my King. and all the world will praise your great name. It's your great name. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs after you. And you alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. Sing that again, as the deer. But as the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs after thee. For you alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my strength, my shield. For you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You're my friends, and you are my brother, even though you are a king. And I love you more than the others, so much more than anything. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. 'Cause faithful you are, and faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, and all your promises are yes and amen. And all your promises are yes and amen. Father, darkness, you fill me with peace and give her mercy. You're my help in time of need. Lord, I can't help but see if faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, and all your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. If faithful you are, if faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, yeah. And all your promises are yes and amen. And all your promises are yes and amen. Yes, you are faithful. And I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. Yeah, I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. Yeah, I will rest in your promises. My confidence, oh, is your faithfulness. Faithful you are, if faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, yeah. And all your promises are yes and amen. And all your promises are yes and amen. And all your promises are yes and amen. And all your promises, yes and amen. Lord, we believe that, God, that you stay the same. God, your promises stay the same. Father, you are full of truth. Lord, you're genuine, you're authentic to us, and God, we just love you. Lord, we lift you up, and pray that you just bless Pastor Mark as he just teaches us your word. In your name, amen.
Good evening, everyone. Last week, we started a series on David's caves. And the way I happened upon that particular study, you might be interested to learn, was on each day of the month, I take the day of the month and go to that psalm. Like, for instance, last week on Tuesday or Wednesday of last week, it was the 22nd. And so I started reading Psalm 22 and then skipped 30 Psalms and went to Psalm 52 and Psalm 82. And you get the idea. Well, I ended up in Psalm 142, reading about David's cave experience. Now, if you've been listening to any of my teachings before, you know that when I get on these themes of David in the dark or David in the cave, it just sort of slows me down a little bit. And So I'm going to continue this week on that same theme because Psalm 143 immediately follows Psalm 142. Isn't that clever of someone? But in Psalm 143, David is praying. Now, he's developed his cry and he's turned his heart towards the Lord in Psalm 142. And you can go back to last week's Bible study and check that out if you choose to do so. But it was based on the idea that when he was running from Saul, he ended up in a place where there was no human help. And he verbalized that to the Lord and ended his prayer with kind of a hopeful promise of the future. And then Psalm 143, from what I understand, written probably in the same cave, right about the same time, another song, perhaps a little bit different tune, but from the same situation, David begins to pray. This is true confession time. Prayer is not my strongest suit. For whatever reason, the discipline, the daily habit of spending time in the Bible and even journaling and thinking about Scripture and meditation over the last several years has become kind of a normal part of how I start every day. I'm not bragging, I'm just saying it's become a part of my discipline. But prayer is admittedly very difficult for me. As soon as I start praying, my mind goes a million different directions. I think of 1,000 things that I should do, letters I should write, emails I need to answer, people I need to call, situations I need to fix. And if nothing of that ever finds any substance, then I'll start daydreaming about this or about that. Prayer is difficult. And there's some ways that I've tried to learn to mitigate that and deal with that. One of the tactics that I use is to place a chair in my study and talk to that chair as if someone's actually there, and it helps. But when I stumbled across this, it just seemed to me like an opportunity to look at how the sweet psalmist of Israel, the man that's described in the Old Testament as a man after God's own heart, how did he pray when the chips were down? How did he structure his prayer? How did he open his prayer? What was on his heart, and how did he articulate that? Now, when all else fails, sometimes I'll simply read these prayers out loud. And in my heart, as I find myself reading them, I'll say, yeah, Lord, that's what I'm trying to say. Yes, Lord, that's what I want to communicate. I don't think there's anything wrong. I had a gal one time say, "But is it wrong to read written prayers?" I said, well, heck no. We've got the prayers of Jesus in John 17. We have the prayers of David and many of the psalmists in the book of Psalms. I don't think there's anything wrong with a prayer. What makes it yours is when you say amen, which means so be it to those prayers. So I'm going to read Psalm 143, and we're going to talk about how David prayed, why he prayed, and kind of what approach he took to God in his prayer. So let's read, and then we'll pause for prayer. Psalm 143, if you're reading along. David says, "Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my supplications. In your faithfulness answer me, and in your righteousness. Do not enter into judgment with your servant, for in your sight no one living is righteous. For the enemy has persecuted my soul. He has crushed my life to the ground. He made me dwell in darkness." Remember the cave thing? "Like those who've been long dead. Therefore my spirit is overwhelmed within me. My heart within me is distressed. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all your works. I muse on the work of your hands. I spread out my hands to you. My soul longs for you like a thirsty land." Selah, which just means to pause. "Answer me speedily, O Lord, my spirit fails. Do not hide your face from me, lest I be like those who go down to the pit. Cause me to hear your loving kindness in the morning, for in you do I trust. Cause me to know the way in which I should walk, for I lift up my soul to you. Deliver me, O Lord, from my enemies. In you I take shelter, or to you I flee. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. Your spirit is good. Lead me in the land of uprightness. Revive me, O Lord, for your name's sake. For your righteousness' sake, bring my soul out of trouble. In your mercy, cut off my enemies and destroy all those who afflict my soul, for I am your servant. Let's pray before we study this together. Heavenly Father, as is our habit, we turn to you and we ask for insight and understanding for the gift of revelation to each of us. You've chosen to include this prayer of David in your Holy Bible, in the Scriptures that we look to for guidance, for comfort, for strength, perspective, and teaching. We see in this, Lord, a man who in his raw realness learned how to pray. Not perfectly, but powerfully. And I pray that each of us, Lord, would find our hearts hungering to talk to you in a similar way, knowing that you hear, you care, that you are good. So in spite of all the stuff going on around us that we just simply cannot control, help us right now to center down, to quiet our own minds and apply ourselves to seek knowledge from your Holy Bible. And we'll praise you. Thank you in advance. In Jesus' name, amen. Psalm 143, how to pray. Now first, as I was trying to think this through, and I tend to be this way, the way I go through scriptures, I think of, okay, how does it break into chunks, and what is the big overarching? And I found two major categories as I tried to, in my own mind, with my legal pad in front of me, to kind of outline and break this prayer into kind of bite-sized pieces. And it seems like he starts out by talking about, these are some good reasons to pray. I found seven. That's 5 and 2. And then how do I pray? And in the latter part of this, he just uses two words: answer me, cause me, deliver me, teach me, lead me, revive me. And so because of the repetition of that style, I saw in these very honest ways to approach my own situation, my own need to pray. So let's begin at the beginning. 7 reasons to pray. He says in verse 1, hear my prayer, O Lord, give ear to my supplications. In your faithfulness answer me, and in your righteousness. It's interesting to note that when David opens this particular song that turned out to be a favorite of the Hebrews and preserved in our Hebrew hymn book here, David couples his activity of prayer with the object of prayer. And he reminds us, hear this, that it's not because of the faithfulness of the one praying that David found hope. It was because of the faithfulness of the one to whom he prayed that David found hope. It comforts me to think, I don't have to have my life in perfectly squeaky clean order before God will lean in and listen to my cries. He's fully aware of all my foibles and all the reasons in my life that I might use as an excuse to distance myself and pull away from God. It's good for us to remember that God is all powerful. He can do what needs to be done. He's all knowing. He knows, and he has the power to do what needs to be done. And the fact that he's omnipresent, he's always everywhere. He's where he needs to be. He knows what needs to be done, and he has the power to do it. And it helps me when I begin my prayer to remember that it's not about my goodness that God leans in to listen, but it's because of the simple fact of faith. I need God. So do you. David did. And he said, so Lord, I'm going to pray, and I'm going to give my supplications. That's one is asking, one's begging. And in your faithfulness, Lord, answer me. In your righteousness, God, I know that you are dependable, and I'm turning to you for that reason. So why should I pray? Number one, because God is faithful. And number two, because God is righteous. He will do the right thing. Now, this is a good place to interrupt myself and say, man, aren't you glad for some of the prayers God chose not to answer? There are things we ask for that God knows would not be helpful to us. Father does know best. And sometimes his greatest answer ever to a prayer is no. In this situation, David's running for his life from his arch enemy, King Saul. He wanted God to kill his enemies. God says, not yet. Not yet. It's not the time. David needed more years of seasoning. David needed more trouble to bring him to full capability as a leader of Israel. God knew that. And so God says, no. Why should I pray? Number one, because God is faithful. Number two, because God is righteous. And number three, because we aren't righteous. Maybe it doesn't directly says it in here, but when David points out God's righteousness, it does highlight the fact that David himself was not righteous. He goes on to say that in your sight no one living is righteous. You may have a problem with that. The truth is, the Bible declares that there is none good, no, not one. J. Vernon McGee was talking in an old country church, and he said, has anybody ever met a perfect man? And one little old, what J. Vernon called a milquetoast guy in the back, raised his hand. And J. Vernon stopped the service and said, you, sir, you know a perfect man? He says, well, I have never met him, but according to my wife, her first husband was perfect. And everybody laughed. God knows. What you and I need to learn is that in us, all of the very goodness that we might produce, the Bible says in Isaiah 59, are as filthy rags in the sight of God. The best we can produce is nothing compared to the goodness of God. It'd be similar to comparing a kindergarten artwork on crayons to the painting of a Michelangelo. They can't compare. So David says, I'm going to pray because God is faithful, because God is righteous, and because we aren't righteous. And then in verse 3, he says, for the enemy of my soul has persecuted me and crushed my life to the ground. Now, we know who he's talking about. He's talking about Saul. But I'm glad that in this context, David chose simply to use the word my enemy, the enemy. You know, I have 3 enemies. And if you're a child of God, so do you. I've got the devil. He's what I like to call the infernal enemy. I've got the world. That's that external enemy that tries to influence me with the culture and the appetites around me. But one of my worst enemies is myself. I call that my internal enemy. So I've got an infernal foe, an external foe, and an infernal foe. When I read the word enemy, and I read that he has persecuted my soul and crushed my life to the ground, it doesn't matter which source that comes from. The truth is, crushed is crushed, and broken is broken. Whether you're broken because of your own choices, the choices of others around you, or the tactics of the enemy to oppress and to attack. The truth is, you need God because your enemy is great. Why should we pray? Because God is faithful, because he's righteous, because we aren't. Because our enemy is great. And number 5, because we are overwhelmed. He said in verse 4, therefore my spirit is overwhelmed within me. The reason I agree with many commentators that this is a prayer written at the same time is Psalm 142, which is transcribed as a prayer of David when he was in the cave. He said in verse 3 of that psalm, when my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then you knew my path. And now he uses that same phrase and says, my spirit is overwhelmed within me, and my heart within me is distressed. When life gets hard, it's so comforting to know that we have a God that we can turn to who is faithful to listen, who is righteous to do what's right, who is not overly concerned with the fact that we struggle in our humanness. It's not that he doesn't care, it's that he anticipated it. But that we have an enemy who attacks, and God is there for us to turn to when we're overwhelmed. Why pray? Because, frankly, there's no one else to turn to. In Psalm 142, David had flat out said, I sought refuge, and there was no one who cared for my soul. We talked about that last week. Maybe you feel like that. Maybe you've turned to family members, and you've even turned to counselors. Perhaps you've tried pastors, and you just don't find anybody who really understands what's going on. Listen, I encourage you, just get honest with God. Get quiet before Him and learn to express your prayer and lay out your petitions to a God who is faithful and does care. In the midst of David's prayer in this first part, before he takes a little bit of a pause, he says, I remember the days of old, and I meditate on all your works. I muse on the work of your hands, and I spread out my hands to you. My soul longs for you like a thirsty land. Look at the way he's looking around him and in his history to find perspective. He says, the first thing I did is I looked back in the days before. One of the greatest gifts God gives us is a memory. But isn't it funny how that we remember all the bad stuff and forget all the good stuff? I don't know about you, but I can remember all the things that have been done wrong to me, but I have a hard time hanging on to the things that are good. I need to force myself to think through. And so just the other day, I got out my pen and a blank sheet, and I put at the top, thank you, God, and then just let my mind begin to roll. One thing, and then another thing, and then another thing, and then another thing, and then another thing. And as I look back in my life, one memory spawned another memory and tipped over another domino, which led to another thing. And David, I think, is doing something very similar. I'm looking back, God. I can't look in right now. There's nothing but overwhelmed and distressed spirit inside here. But I can look back and see how you have led me safely thus far. And we're learning, and Cody mentioned it in one of his podcasts recently, that God's faithfulness demands our future trust because He's been so good to us in the past. He says, I also meditate on all your works. That can mean a lot of things. But I think in this particular context, my mind went to the fact that David's out in nature. He had to run from all cities, all help, no households around him. He's out in the middle of the wilderness. And he's just able to look at God's creation. Perhaps there's no, the stars would be clearer. And out, he was just able to think about what God has done, what God has made, and the vastness of God's universe that gave him a tiny bit of perspective. He spread out his hands, a physical act of submission and request. I have always thought when we worship, people struggle sometimes over why you guys at ACF raise your hands when you worship. Well, to me, it's an act of surrender, but it's also an act of just holding out hands of saying, God, oh, please give it. In my study, when I'm just me and God in my study, I'll quite often begin a prayer with my palms down, just saying, Lord, I'm just going to release to you all the anxiety and the doubt and sinfulness and any confession that comes to mind. I just let it out. Let it drop away. And then simply turn the palms up and begin again to just cry out like David is, Lord, here's what I need. And let him pour out. So David says, I'm going to spread out my hands before the Lord. And why is that? Because my soul longs for you like a thirsty land. Before he takes this break in the middle of this prayer, he uses a metaphor of a thirsty land. And by the way, we need some rain around here. A little bit helps, but man, we need a lot of rain to really catch us up. But imagine being in Judea, in the wilderness of Judea. And if you've ever been outside of Jerusalem, where David was in this case, up in the hills of Bethlehem, perhaps surrounding Bethlehem, it would have been very, very dry. He goes, that's what my soul is like. I'm empty, I'm thirsty, I'm needing a drink. And then he says, Selah. It's a pause. It would be like the fermata sign in music, that pause when the conductor simply just holds the orchestra for just a moment to allow the previous music to fade slowly away before the next movement begins. David says, take a breath. And then he makes it real personal. Here's how he prays. And this is why I chose to talk about this on Wednesday night is I know how to talk. Sometimes I don't know exactly how to pray. Look how David did it. It's a great template for us. He starts in verse 7 by saying, Lord, answer me speedily. Lord, my spirit fails. In other words, he's being honest. He's saying, I can't take much more. Answer me, God. I need you, God. In the Hebrew, this word answer literally means kind of to argue with. Now, I don't suggest that you argue with God, but I do believe that there's an element in this of persistence. Jesus talked about in Luke 18 the parable of the persistent prayer. And he says, men ought always to pray and not faint or not give up or not give in. It's not that we expect God to hear us because we overcome his reluctance, but in the persistent part of pressing into God and arguing my case before the Lord, what happens is my faith is focused and my heart is submitted, and God does something in me before he ever decides to do something around me or for me. So it's healthy for us. God will either change your circumstances when you pray, or he'll change you, both of which are powerful and necessary. You remember what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7? He said, ask, and you shall receive. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. See how it's an acronym, the ASK? Ask, seek, and knock. And then he goes on to say, for everyone who asks receives. To him who seeks shall find. And to him who knocks it shall be opened. Jesus was helping us to understand that it's not the formula that we pray, nor is it somehow that we manipulate God into giving us what we want, but our asking and our seeking and our knocking is so good for us. It postures me properly under God. And so David starts right there in this second half of his psalm when he says, Lord, answer me now, God. There's an urgency in his prayer. And then he said in verse 8, cause me to hear your loving kindness in the morning. What caught me, again, was that repetitious, answer me now, cause me to hear your loving kindness in the morning. God, I'm hearing things. My own thoughts are clamoring in my head. The voices of my enemy and the voices of pessimism and fear are just shouting at me, God. But I need to hear. I long to hear your loving kindness in the morning. Lord, speak. Cause me. It's not that you're not speaking. It's that I'm having a hard time listening. And I would say to all of you, if you feel like God is forsaking you, it's not that God doesn't talk. It's that a lot of times our radio station's tuned to the wrong channel, to the wrong frequency. And God uses these situations like David running into a cave and fleeing from Saul and finding that he had nowhere else to go except God, that got him to the place where he could finally hear what God was trying to say. Cause me to hear your loving kindness in the morning, for in you I trust. Then he repeats again that cause me to know the way in which I should walk, for I lift up my soul to you. Last week we talked a little bit about trust in the Lord with all your might. Lean not in your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. That's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Very familiar to a lot of Christians. Well, when you're in the storm and when you're overwhelmed, when you've gotten to the place, like David said, where my heart is distressed, it's not a good time to be trusting your own intuition to make decisions. Your reaction to my reaction may cause a reaction. And you need and I need to pause and say, Lord, I can't trust my own heart. I can't trust my own sense of direction. I'm going to look to you. I'm going to expect you to direct my path as you have promised. So, Lord, cause me to know the way in which I should walk. I am going to trust you. I'm going to lift up my soul to you, and I'm going to believe that you are going to give me the next step. Maybe you won't give me 10 steps. Certainly won't give me 100 steps. But Lord, you did promise to give me the next one. David said in verse 9, deliver me, O Lord, from my enemies. In you I take shelter. Deliver me, God. Deliver me. Rescue me. Help me. Save me. Fix me, Jesus, is what he's saying. And then in verse 10 he goes, teach me to do your will, for you are my God. Your Spirit is good. And I just pause, and I don't know how much of this, of course, David was thinking through when he's doing this. He certainly probably had no idea that his words would be discussed thousands of years later. But he is aware of his own ignorance. Perhaps there's no smarter place to be than to finally come to the place where you go, I just don't know what I thought I knew. The world that I thought I knew doesn't make sense. And so, Lord, I'm willing for you to teach me. What an awesome place to be honestly teachable. David is there. I pray you and I'll get there. In the latter part of verse 10, he uses another two-word phrase, lead me. He says, lead me in the land of uprightness. I don't think he's necessarily thinking of the land of Israel. He's thinking of the land of the upright ones, the land of those who've chosen to walk straight up with their God leading every step, so that they are vertical in their posture and they are horizontal in their progress as they simply say, God, you point the way. Give me the courage to walk in that path. In verse 11, he follows that same pattern by saying, revive me, O Lord, for your name's sake, for your righteousness' sake, bring my soul out of trouble. The word revive by itself, both in Hebrew and later in Greek, is an interesting study. It literally has the idea of breathing again life into that which was dead, or bringing back to life, resuscitating, as it were, that life that had almost died. Well, in the church and, of course, in Christian circles, when you talk about the word revival, you get all kinds of different images. Back in the South, where I spent some of my Bible college days and ministries days, they would hold what they called revival meetings. Start on Sunday and go all week, sometimes 2 weeks of revival meetings. And it was a chance to gather the church together. Well, I'm not talking about that kind of revival. I'm talking about the awareness that David knew, and you and I know if we're honest, where there used to be fire, but now there's just ash. Where there used to be breath and passion and joy, and now it's just cold and empty. Where the songs that used to bring tears to your eyes no longer affect you at all. In order for there to be a need for revival, which I think the church in America, and I would put myself right dead center in that and say I need a revival too. The reason that there's a need for revival is that there's been a declension. There's been a drawing back. There's been a decay of passion in the church and in our personal lives. One of the things that many pastors that I talk to in the prayer meetings that I go to are saying about this whole COVID-19 thing is that perhaps one of the benefits will be that maybe, if not all, then a certain portion of God's church will be revived, brought back to the inbreathing of the very breath of God. David will say in one of his other Psalms, Lord, revive us that your people may rejoice in you. And when I read this, I think, Lord, it's not about us wanting to feel better. That's a byproduct, and it's here today and gone tomorrow. And emotions, I can tell you one thing, they're just like the weather. They're going to change. But what David is praying and what I'm praying for you and for me is a fresh wind of God's Spirit to blow through our lives, to fill the emptiness, to resurrect the passion and purity and the pursuit of God. David finishes that sentence by saying, Lord, revive me for your name's sake. It's not so that I can brag, Lord. We want to be revived for your glory, for your kingdom, for your cause, for your program and agenda to be advanced. For your righteousness' sake, bring my soul out of trouble. I'm praying for you. I hope you'll pray for me. I sincerely hope that you'll pray for me. If, by the way, to just throw in a little shameless plug, if you do pray for me, I'll give you a couple of things that I personally would beg you to pray for me. Pray for my passion. Pray that I would personally have a passion for Jesus that is authentic and doesn't just come when I'm in front of a camera or in front of a church. Pray for my passion. Pray for my people. Pray for my family. Pray for those around me because they're under attack too, and they live in a glass house and under a microscope and all the rest. I would just ask you if you would pray for me. I would deeply be grateful for that. And then for your own sake, pray for my preaching. Pray that I get better at understanding God's word and communicating it in a way. And man, during these days when we've had to learn to talk to cameras in empty rooms, man, I pray God would help me get better at communicating in a way that's transferable to others. So I would covet your prayer. And I can tell you this, maybe not by name, but your faces come to mind, and I pray for you. And many of you I do pray for by name. And recently went through our database, and just as I went through, just Lord, work in that person's life, and Lord, reveal yourself and heal and bring comfort, and may you sustain those going through grief and loss and all the rest. It's been my privilege to pray for you, and I would hope that you would pray for me as well. And then, in all fairness, David throws in one of these things that bothers some people, doesn't bother me. To me, it makes it real. He says in verse 12, "In your mercy, cut off my enemies and destroy those who afflict my soul, for I am your servant." There really are people who say, the Bible's got some horrible prayers in there. I mean, how Christian is that of David to pray, Lord, cut off my enemies? To me, it's a stamp of authenticity. It shows that this is from a real person who had real problems, who knew that the source of those real problems was another breathing human being. And in his humanness, he just said, oh, God, just cut them off. Lord, deal with them. Now, granted, I'm not saying that we should always end our prayers on that kind of a note. And perhaps there's another verse or two of David's song that got put into another psalm. I'm not sure. But I would say this to you. This is where we started at the beginning of this Bible study. Get real. Get with God. Learn how to pray. Learn to pursue Him. Join me in developing the discipline of carving out time to meet with God. E.M. Bounds said, while the church is looking for better methods, God is looking for better men. May God help you and I. Don't compare yourself to someone else, but get alone with God. Allow Him to take the situation in your life that for you is your personal curriculum, and let Him turn that into a teachable, moldable shaping of your internal character through the quiet cave of prayer. May God bless you and your family. If we can be of any service to you, feel free to put a comment on this page and reach out to us on our website or answering machine at the church, if you will, and just let us know how we can serve you. And I would say to those who are watching that may not be believers, listen, when you hear this, it may think, wow, these Christians have a lot of problems. We're like everyone. We have problems, and so do you. But we have found a source to run to, and His name's Jesus. He is our shelter in the time of storm. And I pray that you would turn to Him as well. Simply say, Lord Jesus, be merciful to me, a sinner. Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That prayer we know Jesus answered for the thief on the cross. Perhaps in your situation, you've been humbled enough and brought to your extremities enough where you are finally willing to throw your hands up in surrender and say, God, I'm willing. Take over my life. King Jesus, be my Lord, be my Savior. If we can help you towards that end as well, you can simply let us know by texting 555-888. Use the word Jesus help. And the text of return to us and also to you, give you a link to some information how we could be a blessing to you. Let's pray at the end of this Bible study. Lord, it's been really good for me, both in my personal devotional time and then to teach it in front of others. I remember an older, wiser man saying, if you want to learn something, teach it. Lord, how you have used my responsibility as a teacher to drive me to deeper understanding of your word and your ways. So, Lord, I would just say, teach me to pray, not just to pray empty words, to check off a box and to move on, but to develop a habit of turning my caves, my problems, into an opportunity to cry out, to get alone, to find perspective, to reach up in faith. Lord, I pray that for every person under the sound of my voice. Thank you for preserving these scriptures for our edification and for our hope. We love you, King Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen. God bless you.
Take my heart, lay it down, and at the feet of you whose crown, and take my life, I'm letting go, I lift it up to you whose throne. And I will worship you, Lord, only you, Lord. And I will bow down before you, only you, Lord. Take my friend, take my fears, all I have, I'm leaving here. Be all my hopes, be all my dreams, be all my delights, be my everything, and I will worship you, Lord, only you, Lord, and I will bow down before you, only you, Lord, and it's just you and me here now. It's only you and me here now. And it's just you and me here now. It's only you and me here now. And I will worship you, Lord, only you, Lord. And I will bow down before you, only you, Lord. I'll bow down, only you, Lord. Yes, I will worship. bow down before you, only you, Lord. Only you, Lord. How great the chasm that lay between us, how high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation, I turned to heaven and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down to glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross is spoken and I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his home. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. And hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. And hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Your living hope. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Yeah, Jesus, yours is the broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Yeah, hallelujah. Praise the one who set me free.